Welcome to Books in 5, where we are interviewing authors of recently published books on relevant topics. We're here today with Stephen Maher, who's recently published. We got The Prince over here, where we're talking about Justin Trudeau's legacy, his upbringing, and his reign in power. So Stephen, good to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
So let's get into it right away. We're going to be asking you 5 questions. We're going to talk to those questions for about 5 minutes, and let's get started. So Trudeau's family, his upbringing, and his father's legacy is very important to him with that last name, right? Let's talk a little bit about how he grew up.
Well, he grew up unlike most people that you've ever met in your life because his father was a prime minister. And his mother, who was much younger than his father, and Margaret Trudeau, who's from here, from British Columbia.
Yeah.
And their marriage fell apart when Justin was about 5 years old, which marked him. The people who know him well think of that as a very important event in his life, which sort of traumatized him. In 1977, on his parents' 6th wedding anniversary, instead of celebrating together, she showed up with the Rolling Stones at the Alma Combo in Toronto.
Yeah.
And never really returned to the marriage after that. It took some time for it to play out, but she was in gossip magazines, and it began a period of a life that was difficult for the children, I think, that she was away, and also she was the subject of gossip around the world for her romances and whatnot. And this really marked Trudeau because he was missing the presence of a loving mother. He describes in his own memoirs kind of how he became desperate for her attention, which is something that sort of attention-seeking behavior is something consistent that we see through him, through his life.
His personality, it was shaped by that, right? Yeah.
It was. And then you have, over the years, a kind of blended family. She remarries, there's half-siblings, and he's the oldest of the 3 boys from the marriage. So he ends up playing a sort of leadership role in the family. You know, the kid who tries to keep everyone on board. His mother was struggling with mental health issues. She was undiagnosed bipolar for many years. And so this makes Justin unusual compared to most people that you know. And the other thing that makes him unusual is that he was the subject of intense scrutiny. As the son of a prime minister.
Of course, yeah.
He goes, after his father leaves politics, he goes to Brébeuf, the elite Jesuit school in Montreal, and where some of the more nationalist Quebecois would see him as a vendu, an enemy. So he has to deal with that. There's one incident that I describe in the book that I lifted from his memoir, that struck me as quite telling, which is as a student, you know what teenage boys are like. They'll try to get at each other.
Yeah.
And he was sitting in class one day, and an older student came along and put a pornographic magazine in front of him that had pictures of his mother.
Yeah.
And he writes about how he could not make any reaction. So you see this kind of very thick skin that he has been forced to develop, a kind of sang-froid, and that prepared him well in a way for a life in politics. So all the time he's meeting people who either think he's marvelous or despise him, who want things from him. So he becomes sort of guarded and thick-skinned, and at the same time really enjoys attention.
I think that also brings into the fact that he grew up with immense wealth and influence with the people who had wealth themselves, right? With traveling, with being amongst that crowd.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, he grew up in that milieu.
Yeah.
He is not immensely wealthy, but he's comfortable. But he's also, if you look at the jobs that he did, you know, whitewater rafting guide, bouncer, teacher in both private and public schools. So he doesn't insulate himself, you know, in a kind of class bubble, right? He remains connected to people in all walks of life. So he's not isolated in the way that other people might be. His father went to Harvard, Oxford, and the Sorbonne.
Yeah.
Justin could have done that if he'd wanted to with his name and connections and so on. But he chose not to do that. He chose not
to, yeah. Okay. That's an exciting childhood and teenage years, and he's getting into early adulthood. Does he have any plans for politics during that time?
He tells people later that he always knew that path was open to him, which I guess would be kind of obvious. Yeah. Although his brother Michel, who tragically died in a avalanche,
yeah.
A lot of people thought he was the one who was going to go into politics. And some people thought Sasha, the other brother,
would want to do that.
Who seems more like his father, a little more intellectual and reserved whereas Justin's more outgoing and artistic like his mother.
Okay, let's move on to the second question now about Trudeau officially putting his name forward to become an MP and eventually becoming leader of the party. How did that come about?
Well, in the 2006 Liberal leadership race, he got involved in Liberal Party politics for the first time to support Gerard Kennedy.
Okay, got it, yeah.
Who ended up coming fourth, if I'm not mistaken. And through his support to Stéphane Dion. And that experience, I was at that convention in Montreal, and it was very intense and fun. And, you know, the Liberals at that time, it was the beginning of the Harper era, and they thought, well, we'll pick a new leader and we'll win, be back in, and it'll be...
Yeah.
So it was quite an event. That's not how things turned out, of course. But he really, he made a splash by showing up at the convention, got to know a lot of the young people around Kennedy.
So he had that star power and people were attracted to him, right? Yeah.
And he really enjoyed it. And he said, oh, this is great. I want to do more of this. I should be looking at politics. He had started and dropped a couple advanced degrees, an engineering degree. And so he'd spent his life kind of not really accomplishing anything commensurate with his gifts and his background. And then he settles on politics. He sees that this is what he wants to do.
And that's a natural fit based on his last name, right?
Yeah.
And obviously that helped him.
Yeah. He told someone I interviewed, well, I always knew that door was open for me if I wanted to do it. And it's not just the family name. He's also has a vigorous and appealing presence. If you meet him, right? He's tall, he's handsome, he has good manners, he carries himself well, he's good at making small talk and all that stuff. All those.
I've been in the room with him multiple times, and that's an accurate description, yes.
Yeah. So he started to really feel it at that convention in Montreal. And then he asks the Liberals if they'll let him run in Outremont. And Stéphane Dion, who didn't have the instincts of a successful politician, said, no, I think I don't want to let Justin Trudeau run there. At first he considered it, but a lot of the Quebec Liberals who are more nationalist inclined said, we don't want a Trudeau. That's a bad brand in Quebec. And Marc Garneau, who was the guy I think they should have let run in Outremont. He, you know, former astronaut, former Canadian
high-profile
naval,
Canadian, yeah.
And admirable. You know what I mean? A life of public service. Intelligent, not the most exciting character, but you know, well regarded. But instead, Dion decides to give the riding to his friend Jocelyn Coulin, who's like him, a kind of not very charismatic academic. He loses to Tom Mulcair, which opens the door later to the Orange Wave in Quebec.
Yeah.
And this forces Trudeau to run in Papineau, which was a block-held riding in a working-class, immigrant-heavy neighborhood of Quebec, which turns out to be the best thing that could have happened because he has to learn how to knock on doors, how to talk to people who hate you.
How to actually campaign. Yeah.
How to give speeches in mosques and gurdwaras and, you know, try to win over the sovereigntists on the other side of Saint Laurent. So that begins his real political career.
And that knowledge and experience obviously helped him to become the leader eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. He showed that he could, And in that election in 2008, when he first was elected, he was one of very few Liberals who picked up a seat. It was an election where they were mostly losing. And then he showed up in Ottawa, and he was a symbol of hope and glamour on Parliament Hill compared to, the rest of the caucus.
Yeah. And then, he successfully becomes leader. And we remember 2015, which is a decade ago now, of him being in third place for a long time in the polling. And then the shift happens and he wins.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how did he pull that off?
It really starts when he seeks the leadership of the Liberals. And his pitch is his family connection to the party and to Canadians is an intrinsic part of what he's offering. He's saying, you know me. You've known me my whole life. And that works. And people are sort of excited about him. And then they start to lay the groundwork policy-wise during that race for the race ahead in 2015.
And, we remember him winning a majority in 2015. So let's move on to our third question. His first 5 years in power, right? We have challenges, we have successes. Let's talk a little bit more about the domestic experience of Canadians, especially younger Canadians who are excited about having a Trudeau government based on the promises that he made, right?
Well, if we wanted to, we could roll up a blunt right now and talk about that.
Of course,
because he made that legal. I think that was a big part of his pitch to young Canadians in the first election. It set him apart.
Yeah.
But he also rolled back a lot of Harper policies that were unpopular with progressives, things around science and the environment and data, and started to substantially expand the social welfare net, the social safety net. He the biggest thing was the Canada Child Benefit, which I think has had a huge impact on parents of modest means, lifted something like 400,000 children out of poverty.
Out of poverty, yeah. Very significant.
But expanded retirement benefits. So and that's something that the government has continued to do, expand the social welfare system. So that was very significant.
You know what? That's a lot, but maybe it's not as in your face as some of the challenges were. And one of the major ones was having Trump in power south of the border and the renegotiation of the NAFTA treaty. So let's get into that a little bit. What was his experience of not only dealing with Trump one-on-one, but trying to get a team around him to successfully navigate those uncertain times?
Well, they were very strategic.
Yeah.
They carefully mapped out each interaction with Trump. They built a team which included important representatives from the conservative movement in Canada, Ron Ambrose and James Moore, Brian Mulroney, right? Yep. And they communicated endlessly with stakeholder groups, business and labor. And they had an excellent negotiator, in my opinion, Steve Verhoeven, and Chrystia Freeland as the political negotiator. And what they managed to do basically is drag it out and not make concessions and drag it out until the Americans ultimately agreed to a deal very similar to the one that they'd started with.
Yeah.
So it was savvy. Trudeau deserves credit for putting the team together. He did not micromanage them.
Yeah.
He got very sharp people, including the people in the PMO, like Brian Clow and British Columbian Diamond Isinger,
yep,
who put a map on the wall with pins in it and would say, okay, we've got so-and-so going to Illinois this weekend, put a pin in it. They recognized that the people who influenced Trump's thinking were different from the think tankers who influenced earlier presidencies, and they would try to be strategic about reaching business people who were pals with Trump, people who own sports franchises.
Yeah. Or specific industries that, for whatever reason, Trump was passionate about, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I give them very high marks for how they managed all that.
Yeah. And you know, that's obviously a very significant part of Canada's foreign policy is south of the border. But, you know, there's a big world out there as well. And there was many challenges related to Canadian relationship with China, Canada's relationship with India, Canada's relationship with even the European Union. I know we only have maybe about 20 more seconds, but would you say that he did a reasonable job, or was it a thumbs down for the rest of the world?
Mostly pretty poor.
Yeah.
I think that our relationship with the EU is probably good, but our relationship with China and India, I think, is terrible.
Yeah.
And he does not appear to have managed these things strategically. I'm a Canadian. I think that the Canadians are right to object to Chinese and Indian interference in our democracy.
Yeah.
So I side with Trudeau, but you can't help but say he doesn't seem to have been successful in defending against these things, in setting the kind of frame that would be successful. And you can point to high-profile incidents where he struggled.
Yeah, so let's go to our fourth question now. His last 5 years in power, starting with the COVID pandemic in 2020, how would you say he handled that compared to maybe the rest of the world, or maybe how a conservative government might have handled it?
I think he handled that very well. And all you have to do is compare the death rates between Canada and the United States. I was covering it quite closely at the time. They were a little slow to get off the mark. What Trudeau does typically is listens to the experts.
Yeah.
So in this case, strangely enough, there were politicians who didn't listen to the experts, like Donald Trump, for instance, shut down flights more quickly. That was the right thing to do. So the experts were wrong and Trump was right. And that's not something you say very often, in my opinion. So, you know, but then Trudeau listened to the experts, and they did some fairly impressive things to get a whole bunch of money out the door that were, you know, it's debt that we're all going to have to pay forever.
Yeah.
But it allowed people to sit at home, except for the street level workers who had to, you know, somebody had to deliver the meals and keep the factories going.
Essential services, yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't entirely, you know, fair. And particularly in Peel, there were a lot of people who really took it hard there, multi-generational households, a lot of South Asian people, that was tough. And it looked for a while like we were going to be slow on vaccines. In the end, our uptake rate was higher, and there were plenty of vaccines. So that was, I thought, quite inspiring.
Yeah, so that was, you know, the domestic sphere. Let's come back to the talk about foreign relations, because again, similar to the first 5 years, the last 5 years have continued challenges, especially regarding China and India. Let's talk a little bit more about what happened with the assassination and Trudeau's response to that, right?
Well, it's very troubling. The whole situation is very troubling. I find it sort of hard to believe that Modi and his bumbling 007 agents would actually be killing people in Canada and trying to do so in the United States.
Yeah.
India has legitimate concerns about security and security cooperation going back to the Air India tragedy. So I don't want to put this in a frame where I say, well, the Indians are right in any way to do the things they did. But I do sometimes think that Canada would have a different security relationship with its traditional allies if they had concerns as the Indians have. If it was Britain or France or the United States, then Canada would have made it a higher priority to deal with these things. So that's sort of the frame of the relationship where I see Canada has failed to manage it appropriately. And at the same time, that's I think Trudeau and his own people told me he feels limited by diaspora politics.
Yeah.
And I think the next government will be limited by different diaspora politics. And that's partly a consequence of having a country with one of the highest rates of immigration of the world.
Yeah.
And many people, even if they've lived in Canada for 30 years, they are still reading the news from the home country before they read
or
the
listening
news from
to
Canada.
the radio in a different language as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for our final little bit for this question, let's talk a little bit about the inflation that came over the past few years, especially from energy prices going up, food prices going up. There was a lot of anger directed at Trudeau because a lot of people felt like, oh, this is his fault. And, we had that convoy come and, that was related to inflation. We had a lot of people angry, putting their anger towards Trudeau regarding inflation, and then, people coming together for different reasons. But just very quickly, how would you say he navigated that time of high inflation? I know it's come down over the last little bit, but just talk a little bit about his economic policies.
Well, so I don't think that his economic policies had much to do with inflation at all. It was the war in Ukraine and supply chain issues. And you can tell that his policies didn't have much to do with it because inflation was very high in the United Kingdom and the United States and every place. And all the incumbents in all those places paid a high price as Trudeau paid, right? So this is what happens. Inflation is a government killer. I know that they did not see it coming. They did not take it seriously enough. I talked to one person who met with them and said, you guys are going to have to watch out because inflation. And they were like, no, we're not really worried about that. And they were slow to send the right signals. They looked out of touch with the concerns of people.
Yeah.
And particularly people outside of his constituency, I think, felt that he'd been so vigorous in pursuing multiculturalism, diversity, feminism, that he was always talking about these kind of trendy, and I don't mean to diminish them as issues. I think they're very important and he made progress. But they didn't hear him talking about
cost of living,
bread and butter, the things that actually we all, or most of us, have in common. So that seemed to be where he kind of lost the plot in a way with a lot of Canadians who are not naturally part of his coalition, are not from downtown, are not from the communities
from
that
the
are
urban centers, right? Yeah. So this is a good segue to our final section, our final question we have for you. Talking a lot about the last few chapters of your book, you're talking about the Pierre Poilievre effect, him becoming the leader and his popularity in the polls. We've seen maybe over the past 12 months, him have a 20-point lead over Trudeau. What has that done to Trudeau's brand, and how has the Conservative Party surged?
Well, Poilievre, it's like he was grown in a vat to take on Trudeau. In a way, I think that it's somewhat similar to the way that the NDP selected Tom Mulcair as a leader earlier, in that the opposition supporters, conservative supporters, really wanted someone who would take it to Trudeau every day. And Poilievre has been very effective in that. I've covered him for years, and he was always a kind of nasty attack dog.
Yeah.
And as people outside Trudeau's coalition were increasingly frustrated with him, in particularly a lot of the prairies, they just can't believe that people keep voting for this guy, and they still have this guy who they despise as the prime minister. So they're delighted to have Trudeau or to have Poilievre taking him down every day. And Poilievre has managed to capture the mood, particularly for young men in this country. Who are frustrated. Their lives have been much more difficult. And Trudeau has not really addressed them. They see him as a kind of phony, fake feminist, hypocrite who isn't concerned with the things that concern them. And Poilievre has managed to rally those people. And success begets success in politics. Now, as of this week, we're starting to see polls that show
a little bit of a convergence. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't, that's early. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But Poilievre basically built his electoral plan around making the next election about two things: getting rid of Justin Trudeau and getting rid of the carbon tax.
Yeah.
The Liberals, about 6 months later than they should have, did manage to get rid of Justin Trudeau and are going to get rid of the carbon tax. So the next election is not going to be about those things. The next election is going to be about something else, likely managing Trump. And I see this as a positive development. An election between Trudeau and Poilievre, I thought, would have been a stupid election because everyone knows that we want to get rid of Trudeau. At this point, he's very unpopular. People want him gone.
Yeah.
So why have an election to decide something that we know beforehand? So I think it's good that there's a prospect of some kind of a competitive election about something else. And this question of how to manage Trump, I think that that's, you know, we're in a new world. Public opinion, I suspect, in this country about pipelines, about national security, defense spending, international relations, is all scrambling. It's all changing.
Yeah.
So
the final minute, I guess, for this question, what do you think Trudeau's legacy is going to be 20 years from now? Is history going to look on him kindly?
I think much better than he looks now, if we don't lose Alberta to the Americans in the next 6 months, right? If the country survives the months ahead, I think Trudeau will look pretty good. I'm reminded of Brian Mulroney, who was terribly unpopular when he left office, and there were revelations about scandalous business dealings that came out after he left office. But by the time he passed away, he was remembered very fondly by Canadians of all political stripes.
Yeah. I
spoke to Mr. Mulroney about Mr. Trudeau, and he said, Trudeau's got a strong record. His legacy will be good. He beat Trump. He beat Scheer.
Beat O'Toole. Yeah.
Beat O'Toole. And he successfully managed Donald Trump and the pandemic. So those are things that, whether you're a conservative or a liberal, you have to say, well, yeah, you know, that's substantial. For progressives, he expanded the social welfare system in a way that had not happened since Mackenzie King, likely.
Yeah.
So this is a very significant.
I think that's a good place to end it. Let's make sure that we all buy Stephen's great book and learn more about Trudeau.
At least one copy. Gift.
And if you're not able to buy it, you know, head out to your favorite public library and read it, because this is a very important biography of an important leader in Canadian's history. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being with us, Stephen. So we're here again with Stephen for some more bonus content. Let's spend a little bit more time with him. We got about 5 more minutes. Stephen, you've been a journalist for a long time covering Canadian politics and Canadian life. What made you want to get into writing and journalism?
Well, I was one of those bookworm kids reading with the flashlight under my bed at night. And
before smartphones, right? Yeah. Yeah,
that's right. When phones were still attached to the wall. And so my parents read to me when I was a kid. I'm a literary kind of person. I like stories.
Yeah.
And I started, when I got out of university, I started at a small weekly in Newfoundland, and continued to work for a bunch of different newspapers. And I'm interested in politics, and I see journalism and journalists as intrinsic to the process. We are as important as the politicians.
Yeah.
Because a democracy is only so meaningful as the knowledge of the voter. So our role is to explain things as best we can to voters so that they can make their decisions and understand the world they live in.
And obviously that's a very important profession, and you know, you take that seriously.
Very much, yeah.
What would you say is the most important story or important revelation that you've uncovered? What are you most proud of? Yeah.
Well, I maybe this book, but the story that I covered that caused had the most impact was likely the robocall scandal.
Yeah.
Which was evidence of conservative wrongdoing during the 2011 election, where they some conservatives used robocalls to send people to the wrong polls.
Yeah.
And the stories that I did with Glenn McGregor on that ended up leading to legislative changes, a federal court case, and maybe most importantly, increased Canadians' awareness of the kind of dirty tricks that people could play. Yeah. This was a new sort of thing in Canada. They'd happened in the United States many times. And it gave the Harper government a struggle to explain its involvement, which they ultimately succeeded in convincing people that they were not, that the government was not responsible for this. But it raised, I think, legitimate questions about the kind of ruthless culture that existed within the conservative movement around Harper.
Yeah, that they would do anything to win, right? Yeah.
Yeah. There's an old saying, conservatives liberals get in trouble for being too kind to their friends. Conservatives get in trouble for being too mean to their enemies.
Yeah, got it. Okay. You mentioned earlier to me when we were on our way over here that you spend a lot of your time in the Caribbean. How did that come about then?
Well, I actually, when I was a young man, I did a youth exchange to Jamaica.
Okay.
And I don't really like winter. So over the years, I used to have a sailboat in Canada, and I realized at some point, well, I should just have a sailboat in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And not have one in Canada. So that's what.
How long have you been doing that for? Doing the winter trips out there?
I bought a boat in Florida in 2019, and it took me some time because of COVID, to get it in ship shape. So I spent several winters working on it in Florida, and eventually sailed it down to Cuba and the Bahamas and so on.
So you're not dealing with the Canadian winters anymore, right? Nice.
No, although I'm pleased that that people who enjoy them get to enjoy them.
That's true. Yeah. So our final minute here, Stephen, I just want to talk about books and reading in general. You know, we live in a world that's so fast paced, where information is just bombarded into people's brains. In my opinion, and why we've set up this podcast, is to get people to slow down, to, sit down with books like yours, to really absorb information. I think that's important in the world that we live in. I just want to get your opinion on how do we get more people to put away their phones and to read more books?
Well, my experience of politics and talking to voters shows you that an awful lot of people are not engaged, and you can't force them to be engaged. You can try to say, well, this is interesting and important, but if they don't want to pay attention, they're not going to. I've observed that fewer people are reading now, and everyone's attention span is getting shorter because of smartphone and
technology,
algorithmic social media. So I feel like it's kind of like telling people that they should eat more salad and not so much junk food, but they should, right? Because there's the ability. I think Kurt Vonnegut said this about meditation. Reading a book written by, Lucretius in 300 BC.
In Roman times, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You are meditating with a mind that's been gone for a long time. Your ability to project your mind into different places and learn about different things, I think nothing touches it.
Yeah, no, that's the whole reason that we've set this up, and I'm glad that you've written this book, and I'm excited about your journalism in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
The host of Books in 5 is Bhavan Sodan. Books in 5 is produced in collaboration with Podfather Creative in Vancouver, Canada.